Yes, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present this advice in relation to Mr. Nguyen's employment. Um, and I guess the first question really is, can Mr. Nguyen make a claim under unfair dismissal laws? There's a few things that we have to be satisfied of before Mr. Nguyen can make it or can lodge a claim with the Fair Work Commission. Firstly, is Mr. Nguyen employed by a national system employer? A national system employer who has dismissed is protected from unfair dismissal and eligible to make an application for an unfair dismissal remedy. So it's obviously clear as well that Mr. Nguyen has been dismissed from his workplace. So that issue is satisfied. Secondly, we need to be satisfied that the minimum period of employment to be able to make an unfair dismissal claim was satisfied. Now, as Bistro has less than 15 full-time employees, Mr. Nguyen has to have been at work there for a year as opposed to 6 months if there had been more than 15 employees in the business. Obviously that's not an issue, but I'll just turn to that in a second. The other final element is whether or not Mr. Nguyen's income is less than the high income threshold. That is currently at $148,700. So that is not an issue. You're no doubt going to ask if Mr. Nguyen being employed casually changes the advice. As Mr. Nguyen is a casual employer, periods of service by him will only count towards the minimum period of employment, that is the period of 12 months that we discussed, if, and there's two things that must be satisfied. Firstly, that he was employed on a systematic and regular basis, and secondly, that he had a reasonable expectation of ongoing employment on a regular and systematic basis. Now, he's been at the business for 3 years. The last 7 months, he's been working 32 hours a week, and it's clear that he had an expectation this was going to go on. So, ultimately, we reached the conclusion that Mr. Nguyen's eligible to make a claim for unfair dismissal in the Fair Work Commission. So, I guess once that claim is made, and I'll get to the making of that claim later on and how that's done, we also need to ensure that there's merit in the application. So, in assessing whether or not Mr. Nguyen was actually unfairly dismissed from his employment, we'll need to satisfy the Fair Work Commission that his dismissal was either harsh, unjust, or unreasonable. Now, it doesn't need to be all three. It can simply just be one of those three factors. Now, in determining whether or not any of those three factors exist, the Fair Work Commission will have regard to some of the following. Namely, whether or not there was a valid reason for dismissal concerning Mr. Nguyen's capacity or conduct, and if so, whether or not he was notified of that reason prior to or his actual dismissal. Whether Mr. Nguyen was afforded an opportunity to respond to any capacity or conduct related issues. Basically notification. Also, any unreasonable refusal by Bistro to permit Mr. Nguyen to have a support person assist concerning discussion related to his dismissal. So obviously it's a very small business, so there's not an HR department, so I'll talk about that in a sec, but that's unlikely to be relevant. The size of the bistro and the likely impact that will follow as a result of the internal controls, the degree to which the absence of HR management specialist would impact on the procedure followed by bistro, and also as any other matters as the Fair Work Commission deems relevant. So the process for making a claim, an unfair dismissal application is required to be lodged in the Commission within 21 days following Mr. Nguyen's employment. So that 21 days starts the day after he was dismissed, not the day of his dismissal. The application must name the employer who the claim has been made against. And there's also a small filing fee which is associated with the application, and the non-payment of that filing fee could potentially result in the Commission making a finding that the application was not made validly. I guess the process once an application is made to the Fair Work Commission is that there's a conciliation, that is a voluntary process whereby an attempt is made to assist both Bistro and Mr. Nguyen in resolving the dispute. Now, this is generally referred to as an informal method of resolving the claim, and it is generally conducted via telephone. So it's quite a laid back thing, and not a very litigious procedure or experience for people to go through. The final two, there we go. We have a determinative hearing. This is often behind closed doors, where it's heard by a commissioner, and he or she will give reasons following the hearing. And there's also just a public hearing. That is where it's generally a process which is conducted in public, and also results in a decision. This hearing's a lot more formal, as opposed to a determinative conference. If I could just provide Mr. Nguyen some advice, based on the fact that he was sacked due to deficiencies in his work, that Bistro had never discussed any deficiencies in his work with him, and I emphasise deficiencies in his work, and also that Mr. Nguyen was notified to attempt to rectify his relationship only 1 day prior, perhaps not given any opportunity to, one might submit. And I also do take into account in reaching my advice that Bistro will be afforded some leniency due to being such a small business and having no HR. But in my opinion, and my advice is that those factors coupled together, it's open and it's likely that a claim for unfair dismissal could be successful, and that Mr. Nguyen does have a valid claim. The remedies the Fair Work Commission can make are the potential reinstatement of Mr. Nguyen, and also the payment of compensation to Mr. Nguyen by Bistro. However, the ordering of these remedies is discretionary, and it's discretionary in the hands of the Fair Work Commission. I should also note that there's not an automatic right to compensation, or Mr. Nguyen doesn't have an automatic right to compensation, even if the Fair Work Commission was to find he was unfairly dismissed. Finally, in relation to legal representation, obviously we're providing Mr. Nguyen with advice at present. If Mr. Nguyen was to want us to represent him in the Fair Work Commission, any private legal representation will have to seek leave, or seek the permission rather, of the Fair Work Commission in order to be present and to legally represent that person. In relation to costs orders and potentially Mr. Nguyen getting his funds or his money back, his legal expenditure, the Fair Work Commission does have the power to award costs to a party to proceedings if they're satisfied that the costs incurred as a result of an unreasonable act or omission by one party. That's in relation to the costs generally. I guess in relation to legal costs, the Fair Work Commission will only make an order if the matter was either initiated or responded to vexatiously or without reasonable cause, or if this was done with no reasonable prospects of success. That is, whether the matter was defended with no reasonable prospects of success or initiated with no reasonable prospects of success. So I'm happy to take some questions from you all, but that's the presentation. Thank you.